In this half, we want to talk about what it means to be a Republican in America today, in a party where Donald Trump so dominates the Republican Party. Anthony, this is a discussion I've wanted to have with you for a while, because I know you are a member of the Republican Party. You have been for many years. You've voted for many Republican politicians. And I know that also clearly that you don't like Donald Trump, who is the head of the Republican Party, and you don't want him to be elected. But what does it mean to you today to be a Republican in terms of ideology as opposed to being a Democrat? Because I don't think you're a Democrat either.
No, I'm definitely not a Democrat, and I'm not a Republican in Donald Trump's Republican Party. So he shifted the party. It's almost as if Huey Long and Charles Lindbergh had a baby, and the baby was raised by Roy Cohn, and that baby was Donald Trump. And so if you understand our history, we've had America First movements, we've had isolationist movements, we've had ruthless people that have been on both sides of the political spectrum, but that's the Republican movement. It's isolationist, it's American atavism, it's American nativism. You know, it's us first, everyone else last. Don't let anybody else into the country. I don't like newcomers. I only like the people that are here already. And that's Donald Trump's party today. And it upsets me because, I grew up in a union family. My dad was a member of a union. The Republican Party controlled the union. And so my father was adamant about all of us registering as Republicans and voting in those town councilmen that were helping him with his wages. So I became a Republican by accident. Then I went to school. When I was at school, Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. And so I'm going to just tick off a few things about, for me, what it means to be Republican. Reagan, optimistic. Reagan, aspirational. Reagan, we're going to make sure that the government has fair regulation for business. We're going to lower your taxes so that you too can be a part of the American dream. Aspirational, an aspirational laboratory for America. Muscular. We're going to have a good, sound national defense policy. Ronald Reagan said peace through strength. I'm going to keep us out of wars by strengthening our military. And oh, by the way, we're a benevolent country. And so therefore, we're going to have peacekeeping operations around the world. I'm not interested in wars. Remember, he pulled us out of Lebanon after the 1983 bombing of the Marine barracks. Reagan, I'm going to be tough on the Soviet Union, but if they want peace, I'll have a rapprochement with them. And he went in his last year of the presidency to meet Gorbachev in Moscow. Reagan, by the way, on the way to that summit, he stopped and met with all the Jewish refuseniks in Moscow before he got to the Kremlin. That's Reagan. I'm for peace. I'm for liberty. I'm for this aspirational opportunity. So that's how I grew up in the Republican Party. When George Herbert Walker Bush took the leadership, it was noblesse oblige. He was more of an aristocrat than Ronald Reagan, but he believed in the rules-based society and the post-World War II economy and the post-World War II structure. That's the party that I grew up in. That's the party of Eisenhower. That's the party of Reagan. This party dates back to Abraham Lincoln, who was the first Republican presidential candidate. The Whig Party dissolved over the fight over slavery. Lincoln said that we had to get rid of it. They formed a new party called the Republicans. He won the presidency with only 43% of the vote. So that's the party I'm part of. That's the party of Mitt Romney. That's the party of John McCain. In 2012, we sat down as a party, and I've discussed this on our podcast, and said, okay, we've got a lot of things wrong here. What the Republicans did in the 1960s and 70s after the Civil Rights Act, they went with something called the Southern strategy. So they were blowing racist dog whistles to try to secure the Southern, the Sun Belt states.
Right.
And we got a little off kilter. And what we said in 2012, we probably need to be more embracing of this beautiful, colorful mosaic of the American people.
Which, by the way, George W. Bush had been compassionate conservatism.
Yes, he was trying to do that.
Open to immigration.
Open to immigration. We were trying to fix all of this. When Romney lost in 2012, we said, okay, we got to have a new message. And then in came Donald Trump with his 15 million Celebrity Apprentice viewers. In came Donald Trump with his 100% name ID Remember, the number one thing you need to be president in the United States is name recognition. Right? That's the number one thing. Money is second. People know who you are when they look at oh, I know that guy. I'm going to vote for him. A lot of low information voters, they vote at the last minute. They're not as tied into politics as you and me. So to just finish up this thought, Mr. Trump came in, he big-footed the establishment, and then he did something that no politician does. He said controversial things. Politicians get to a microphone like this and they say blah, 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 and they try to get out of the room without offending anybody. Trump came in as like an orange wrecking ball, smashing into things, and he saw something that I'm embarrassed to tell you, Katty K, I did not see. Okay, and this is my mistake, and I have to own this for the rest of my life, but I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood, but I ended up going to Tufts and Harvard, and then I started hanging out with hedge fund people and going to Davos, Switzerland, and I got the confirmed biases of the elites. So what I didn't see is that the people I grew up with who were blue-collar aspirational, they became blue-collar economically desperational over a 35-year period of time due to various bipartisan policies. Trump saw it. He went into those areas. I was there with him, 71 campaign stops with him, and he was talking directly to those people, and they looked at him and said, okay, this guy gets it. I'm suffering here. My children are going to do worse than I did. That's very un-American from our American idealism. But Trump represents a demolition of the current status quo of the political environment. So, yes, he can shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue. I don't care. I'm voting for him come hell or high water. So what he did, Katty, is he perverted the Republican Party, and he turned it into Joe McCarthy's party, Charles Lindbergh's party, Huey Long's party, Father Coughlin. These are all the ancient nativists in the country. And by the way, classically, Lincoln would be rolling in his grave because Lincoln wanted inclusion and Lincoln wanted a fairer society for people.
I went through the list of kind of things that you talked about. Optimistic, that is not really where the Republican Party under Trump is. Aspirational, no. Muscular, no. Tough on Soviet Union, no, not at the moment. But there are a couple of things that maybe you still have in common with the Republican Party under Donald Trump, and that's, you described it as fair regulation. A lot of people would describe it as deregulation and low taxes. And Donald Trump, in his economic speech this week, also suggested that there are going to be lower taxes for Americans. So are there policy issues? Take out the nativism and the appeal to people's desire to blame somebody else for their economic circumstances. Are there things that still, in policy terms, you feel more affinity with the Republican Party, even today's Republican Party, than you do with the Democratic Party? Yes
and no. So yes, I want there to be fair regulation. I want us to have a comprehensive energy strategy. You have to go from coal to oil to natural gas. You can't just cut everything and pretend you're going to have wind supply the energy for this industrial economy. It's not going to work, okay? And all of that optics and all of that virtue signaling is a bunch of malarkey, to use the Joe Biden expression. And so, yes, I'm for a practical business and practical energy policies, practical tax policies. However, what I don't like is the profligate spending. You know, Donald Trump spent $7.9 trillion in 4 years. We went from George Washington to George W. Bush, $7 trillion, 4 years of Donald Trump spending like drunken sailors. And so we can't do that to our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren. Now, but in a sense, Anthony, isn't the rejection of fiscal conservatism that you heard, I mean, at its peak, you heard it in 2012 at the Republican National Convention. I was there, Mitt Romney's convention, and it wasn't just an economic policy. It was a badge of patriotism to talk about deficit reduction. It was almost an act of faith to talk about deficit reduction. Oh, he would have been a great president, and he had some great ideas to reduce that deficit, which maybe someday we'll talk about. But what happened here, Trump saw something that other politicians didn't see.
And in a way, Trump went to those blue-collar workers, which is partly why I imagine you were attracted to Trump in the beginning. He went to America's working class and said, you know what? This deficit reduction stuff, That's for the coastal elites in the party. What we actually need to do is forget the idea of cutting social services, cutting your pensions, cutting your health care, because that doesn't help the working class. And he gave the working classes in America, in a way, by expanding deficits, he gave them something that they wanted and needed. He flipped he took the Democrats' tent and he said, he flipped it up and put it up in the Republican garden and said, okay, we are no longer the party of deficit reduction. We're the party of spending.
You see, you are so eloquent and you're like a posh Brit. So I'm going to say it differently than you. Okay, ready? I'm walking up the plane steps with Trump. And I'm like, wow, that wasn't really a Republican speech that you just gave.
No.
I think we were in like a Youngstown, Ohio.
It's a Democratic speech.
He looks at me as we're wrapping up the plane. He says, hey, imbecile. I said, yes, sir. He says, you're fiscally conservative and you're socially liberal, right? You're a New Yorker. Aren't you fiscally conservative and socially liberal? You're a New Yorker from Wall Street. I said, yes, sir, Mr. Trump. That's exactly what I am. Well, you're an imbecile. Let me tell you where these Republicans are. They're socially conservative, Katty K. They're socially conservative, pro-life. They are fiscally liberal. You've got the whole thing wrong, Scaramucci. And this is where they are, and that's why I'm talking to him this way. Do not underestimate the SOB's political instincts. Okay, and so the current crop of voters that sit in the Republican Party they have an orthodoxy around Christianity, ask Tim Alberta, and they have a view. There's a great sign from the Tea Party, and there's a guy out there. He's holding the sign up. It says, "Get your government hands off my Medicare." And then there's a journalist walks up to the guy, excuse me, that's a government program. And the guy goes, oh, okay. And then he slinks away. The point is come on, Katty, this is Trump's America. And if the Harris people don't understand what I'm saying, they're going to lose the election.
Yeah.
They have to calibrate themselves to parry what Trump knows. You don't have to like him, but this guy went from reality star and real estate executive 18 months later to the American presidency. So you can't deny his political acumen. But I think he's a nut job, and I want to return to some level of normal republicanism.
And the last president to balance budgets was actually Bill Clinton, a Democrat. And the last president since then to reduce deficit spending was Barack Obama, also a Democrat. Actually, the Republican Party has spoken about fiscal conservatism, but it's George W. Bush and Donald Trump who have boosted deficit spending.
So this is the fascinating thing that you're saying, and I just want to add something to it, and people can Google this. If you go back to 1990, George Bush and Richard Darman, his budget director, said we had too much deficit spending under Reagan. Let's put up some guardrails. And you can Google this. It's called pay-as-you-go legislation. If we're going to have a tax cut, we have to find something in the budget to cut. If we're going to increase social services, we have to increase taxes. Bush put this in place. And then when the Gulf War happened, we went into a recession. He raised social services because of the recession, and therefore he raised taxes. Mm-hmm. Read my lips, no new taxes. He lost the election. But Bill Clinton, God bless him, adhered to the pay-as-you-go legislation. There was a very famous battle. Bob Rubin, my old boss, and Robert Reich, the Secretary of Labor, my old professor from Harvard Law School, they were fighting in the Roosevelt Room. One wanted to raise taxes to pay for all the services that Clinton wanted. The other one said just spend deficits. And Bob Rubin won that. He said, beware of the bond vigilantes. And they set up an 8-year plan to reduce the deficit. And it worked, Katty. We had a $240 billion surplus at the end of Bill Clinton's fiscal year 2000. Yeah. So anyway, just the point I'm making is it was started by Republicans. Clinton adhered to it, and it worked. And then George W. Bush unraveled it when he went to war with the Afghanistan and Iraq.